Hey, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. I'm Paul Caminiti. I'm one of the co-founders of the Institute for Bible Reading. We are an activist think tank working to change the way the world reads the Bible. And today we're gathering around this conversation, how to change the way the church reads the Bible, and maybe more specifically, how your church engages the Scriptures. And I want to say right out of the chute that there's a desperate need today for us to change the way we're reading the Bible. Bible reading is fundamentally broken, and to say that we have a Bible illiteracy problem is to really soft pedal it. The reality is that we are smack dab in the middle of a silent crisis of Bible disengagement. And it is hurting the foundations of our faith. We are entering into what some church historians are calling a phase of Bibleless, or maybe more accurately, Bible-ish Christianity. So that may be a kind of a jarring way of starting this session. So let me rephrase it in a more positive way, and I think a more hopeful way. I believe that there is a shining universe of Bible engagement that's out there that is waiting to be explored, waiting to be taken a hold of. I'm not talking about taking our current system of engagement and kind of tweaking it. We are talking about some systemic changes that need to take place with the Bible and really a paradigm shift. And so we're going to take that on today under the rubric of this question, changing the way your church reads the Bible. So how would we go about a massive change like that? We know that changing anything systemically or changing anything corporately is very difficult. But we're going to talk about what changes need to take place and what are the barriers for those changes to take place and what kind of methods do we need to follow in order to get there. One of the cues that we've taken in terms of implementing change comes from one of our board members, Andy Crouch, who wrote a book called Culture Makers. And in his book, he makes the case that if you want to change culture, you don't do it by harping on the culture you don't like or the negative culture. You change culture by creating a better culture. And so that's what we are attempting to do. And we've started out then by trying to create a better cultural experience with the Bible. We knew that in order to do this, we were going to need a different kind of Bible, and we were going to need a publisher who would be willing to go there with us, to explore, to be entrepreneurial, and we found that symbiotic partner in Tyndale House Publishing. And today I'm excited to introduce you to a groundbreaking resource for you and your church to engage the Bible together, and it's called Immerse, the Bible Reading Experience. And as one professor at a university said to me who is using Immerse in their New Testament survey class, said, Immerse, this new system, truly is revolutionary. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to give you a sneak peek of the Immerse Bible, what it looks like. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the backstory of Immerse. I don't think leaders should grab hold of new ideas, paradigm shifts too quickly. And so we don't want to ask you to swallow something that you haven't had an opportunity to properly taste. And then we'll take some time to get under the hood and to talk about Immerse. So keep in mind that throughout this session, I'll be referencing different resources specifically about Immerse that are available to you. And you can find those resources on the resource tab on your screen or by visiting our website at immersebible.com. So let's first of all talk about Immerse, and let me introduce it to you. Immerse comes in 6 volumes, and I'm going to go through them quickly one by one. We started with Beginnings. This is the Pentateuch. The second module is called Kingdoms, Joshua through Kings, what I think theologians call the former prophets. And then the prophets themselves in a better historic order, and with an understanding that there were different audiences that were being written to, and this is called out in the prophets. And then the next section is the poets, and organized by song lyrics, so Psalms, Song of Solomon, etc., and by wisdom literature, so Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and so forth. And then in the First Testament, the last module is Chronicles. These are the writings that came to Israel after the exile. So this is 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, and Nehemiah. By the way, originally one book, split apart because there wasn't enough room for it all to fit on a single scroll. And then included in this as well is Esther and Daniel. And then finally, we have the New Testament, which we are calling Messiah. So that's just a sneak peek. You're only seeing the covers. Frankly, these 6 volumes is strategic. One of the things that it does is that it tells us that the Bible is not a single book, but the Bible is a collection of writings, something that many people don't think of today. And frankly, this looks more manageable to somebody. Somebody looks at this and says, I can do that. I had a college student who we asked, could you read this in 6 weeks? And I remember still, she gave us a look of disdain, and she said, are you kidding me? I could read that this weekend. So that's Immerse, and the good stuff is on the inside, and we'll crack that open and look at it in a minute. But let me take a few minutes to talk to you about the backstory of Immerse. Because honestly, Immerse didn't begin as a product idea. It really began as some ruminatings from a group of people who were in the Bible publishing business. And it started about 15 years ago. I was one of those people. That time I was the vice president and publisher of Bibles at Zondervan. And we began to have what I would call a crisis of conscience about what we were doing with the Bible. And frankly, our Bible publishing strategy was to publish one niche Bible after another. And it was very successful, and it was very lucrative. And our parent company in New York City was very happy with the work that we were doing. But we began to have a question about whether or not the gift that the Spirit gave us was meant to be used in this fashion. And so this unease that we felt, this angst that we felt, led us to do some research. And one of the first things that we did is we began doing some surveys about people who were using our study Bibles and our devotional Bibles. And we discovered to our chagrin that they were spending more time with the notes, with the prayers, with the devotions, and with the text, secondary, and sometimes not at all. That led us to even further research, and what we discovered was what we might call the current state of the Bible. And it's represented on this graph by 2 divergent trend lines. And the first trend line is the access trend line. And what that is telling us is that the Bible really is skyrocketing today. Did you know that the average household in North America owns 4.5 Bibles? We still sell 25 million new Bibles every year in North America. And that doesn't count for the additional millions of Bibles that are given away to people by Bible agencies and the likes. I was recently asked to do an interview with a leading periodical, and we talked about this fact, and I made the statement to the author that this means that the Bible is not only the best-selling book of all times, but the Bible is the best-selling book every single year. And then, add to that phenomenon the new YouVersion app, where we now have 100 million plus people who have downloaded that onto their phone, and they're using it. But there's a second line here, and it's the Bible reading line. And this, frankly, is a devastating line. It's not overstating it to say that in our generation, at this existential moment of time, that we are hemorrhaging Bible readers, that Bible reading is in free fall. In a single generation, we have lost 20% of our Bible readers. And I still remember that our team was together one day and we were looking at this, and one of our numbers guys was kind of massaging the numbers, and he stopped us and said, if I'm looking at this right, it means that we, since 1985, have been losing on average 700 Bible readers a day. And in the room, we had a business guy, somebody who was doing some consulting with us. And as we kind of let that sink in, he said, guys, you're the world's leading Bible publisher. I don't want to tell you how to do your business. But if we were in any other industry, there would be all kinds of alarms that would be going off. The corporate board would be demanding some answers. If we were P.F. Chang's, for example, and we found out that 700 people a day in North America were saying, I think I've had my last Chinese meal, we would all be distressed about this situation. And yet, this business person said, I don't see the distress here, and I'm not sure that I really see it in the corporate body of Christ either. This is, frankly, not just people that are walking away from the Bible, but in a recent study that measures people's attitudes toward the Bible, the fastest growing category are those who are antagonistic towards the Bible. Many of these people earlier were in a category that was called neutral to the Bible. And now many of those people are saying, I'm not sure it is the good book. Maybe it's not a good book after all. Maybe it's a book that promotes slavery and bigotry and things like that. And so, honestly, that's the state of the Bible. Now, again, as we dug deeper, we discovered that another level down, there's some really good news. And I guess I would phrase it in this way. The news is that there is not a lack of appetite amongst churchgoers for the Bible. And this came out in a pretty amazing way in the Reveal study done a number of years ago, where 80,000 churchgoers from across the country, all different denominations, were queried. And one of the questions that was asked was, what do you need most from your church? And it was a multiple choice type thing. There were about 12 different boxes, something about better programming for our children and our young people, in-house amenities like coffee shops, better preaching, better band, etc. But there were a whopping 87% of the people who said, help me understand the Bible in depth. Amazing. Now, the follow-up question was, is your church helping you to do that? And 19% responded in the affirmative. And so that leaves then what we are calling the gap. And that gap is very interesting. It's kind of a marketer's dream, honestly. A marketer that said, here's a felt need, and here's where the need, this is the level at which the need is being met. There's a huge opportunity there. This is a gap that is freighted with energy. And if I was a pastor today, I would get really jazzed about that gap and what we could do. And so we need to plug into that. There need to be a lot of conversations about that at the corporate church level. And we can't plug into it with what we've always done before, which is, just encouraging people to try harder and this year really, really, really try to read through the Bible. That's a strategy that clearly has not served us well. And yet here is this massive, opportunity. So, this begs the question. If people are genuinely hungry, if there's not a desire problem, okay, the desire is there, and in addition, we're swimming in a sea of Bibles, then why are so many people disengaging? And I want to tackle that for a couple of minutes because, again, that's part of the backstory of why we decided to create Immerse. And so a number of us had opportunities to go out and begin talking to scholars, to Christian thought leaders, to pastors, to behavioral psychologists, to ask why the divergent trend line? Why, since we have so many Bibles and arguably good Bibles, why is Bible reading in free fall? And over the course of time, we came out with this public statement. We believed, based on our research and our surveys, that the modern church had inadvertently developed some bad habits in the way that we think about and the way that we engage the Bible. And the first bad habit is this: we read the Bible in fragments. I don't find many people that argue with that statement. And I still remember a lunch that I was having with the Christian journalist Philip Yancey, and we were talking about this pattern in the modern church. And he said, I think the modern church created an entire culture of Bible McNuggets and assumed they were nutritious. Think about that for a minute. We, and who would be in the we? Publishers, Christian leaders, denominational leaders, pastors. We created an entire culture of Bible McNuggets and assumed that they were nutritious. Now here's where it gets interesting. This fragmented reading in sound bites, it didn't happen in a vacuum. Fragmented reading is a byproduct of the fragmenting of the Bible's form. And you know this history, but let's just do a quick refresher on how we got our modern Bibles. We'll begin by introducing two people who I would call the fathers of the modern Bible. These guys are not villains. These were good-hearted people that were trying to do good things with the Bible. But the first one is Stephen Langton. He was the Archbishop of Canterbury in the 13th century. And up to that point, the Bible that people, primarily, again, scholars, because Bibles weren't printed at that time as we know them, but it was a clean text. But in the 1300s, Langton, who was a prolific writer of commentaries, especially Old Testament commentaries, began realizing that he needed a set of markers to help reference people to what he was saying in his commentaries. And so he was the first one to really introduce chapter breaks to the Bible. But the really massive change to the Bible's form didn't come until the 16th century when Robert Estienne, a French classical scholar and a publisher, had a bright idea that the Bible needed a concordance, a way to look up individual words and phrases. And he immediately knew that in order to do that the Bible would need a lot more markers. And so single-handedly, he began adding verses to the text. And what happened there was then kind of a bit of a perfect storm. Remember, this is the era of the Reformation, but it was also the birth of printing as we know it in the invention of the Gutenberg press. And for the first time now, people were able to go and purchase a Bible. And what did those first Bibles look like? The picture that you see is a shot of the Geneva Bible, one of the first printed Bibles. The text has a minority position. It is surrounded by notes. There was a point of view by the publishers, and they wanted to make sure that the readers understood that. But the part that I find even most fascinating is notice that each of these verses is treated as a separate paragraph, giving the reader the understanding that the Bible is made up of 30,000 or so freestanding statements, all little moralisms about life in God's world. It was an amazing turn of events in terms of the Bible's history, and honestly one that has gone unrecognized and isn't talked about. Somebody put it this way: we took an artificial paratext and laid it over the Bible's text. Biologically, that would be called an exoskeleton, a skeleton outside of the body. And it absolutely has transformed the Bible from something that it was in the ancient world to something that it is in the modern world. So here's a way to think about this and a way to understand this. Most of the Bibles that we have available to us in the market today, then let's call them what they are. They are reference Bibles. Whenever you have numbers and directions about where to go, it's a book that's designed for looking things up. The reference Bibles are here to stay, and they serve, in many cases, a very good purpose. What there's been a dearth of, and one of the reasons that we created Immerse, was that we are in dire need of a new category of Bibles that we're calling reading Bibles. And we would argue that that's really the Bible's first design. Before to be studied, it was designed first and foremost to be read. Second bad habit is that we read the Bible outside of its historical context. And again, this is all part of that perfect storm. When you take verses instead of books as the Bible's primary unit of engagement, context always takes a huge hit. Or as one pastor said to us about the context problem, he said, hey, look, for the person in my pew, almost universally, the Bible for them is a bag of beads without a string. They know the sayings of the Bible, but they don't know the saga of the Bible. And of course, this has led to all kinds of faulty proof texting and verse jacking. The third bad habit that we've developed is that we read the Bible in isolation. At its very core, the Bible is a communal book. It was written to communities of faith. Even letters that were addressed to individuals like Timothy says in the book, read this to the church. And we know even from more recent studies that are being done really right now about life in the early synagogue, that it was far more participatory and interactive than we thought at the beginning. But the reality is in our modernity, we have somewhat lost our way. The Bible has become, even amongst the devout, a solo sport. Our rugged individualism has led us toward things like our private devotions and our quiet times and our personal Bible study, all great places to begin, but not a good place to end. So let's face the reality. These bad habits, reading the Bible in fragments, reading outside of historical context, and reading in isolation are hot-wired into our current Bible culture. And it has made the Bible harder to read. It's made the Bible less enjoyable. We know the stories, but we're not getting the big upper story. And maybe more seriously, these habits have distorted the Bible's nature. So when we started to create Immerse, and this is a thrilling project for us, we created it to address all of those issues. And again, this is a systemic change. We built Immerse around three values. We wanted people, first of all, to read big. We wanted to help the church move from a snacking model to a feasting model. And arguably, we have some work cut out. We have work to do. As publishers, As pastors, one of the things we need to do is disabuse people's minds of the perception that the Bible is this impossibly long and difficult book. I was really fascinated by a recent survey where people were asked how long they thought it would take to listen to the entire Bible. The average layperson thought it would take over 1,000 hours. The average pastor thought 400 to 500 hours. If you listen to the Bible from cover to cover, it takes 80 hours. 80 hours. Think about that in comparison to some other things. If you binge watch Friends, for example, 87 hours. If you binge watched The Office, and I know people that have done that more than once, 99 hours and 30 minutes. Harry Potter, which has been read by so many of our young people 2 or 3 times, 20% longer than the Bible. 40 of the Bible's books can be read in less than an hour. And so this is something that is a challenge before us, but it is a doable challenge to help people to understand that the Bible is this accessible book. And, if we just read it a chapter at a time or a page at a time, that's as one professor at a university said, that's the way to make whatever your next read is the worst read of your life. If you read a page a day of anything, at some point you will weary of it and you will put it down. So we want to help people to read big. We want them with Immerse to read real. It was the British theologian N.T. Wright who said, we have to train people to read the Bible first with first century eyes and then ask 21st century questions. And this is something that we do with Immerse. We help the reader get into a BC mindset or a first century mindset. And then the third value with Immerse is we're encouraging people and calling people to read together. We have a vision for a new normal, and that is that we would take our privatized devotional life and turn it into something far more communal. What would happen if it would be kind of weird that you were reading your own stuff and people that you were close to are all doing their individual thing and you never came together? What happens if we all literally got on the same page and then got into a regular rhythm of coming together to talk? And so this is really just good social science. The American Lung Association tells us that the success rate of individuals who try to quit smoking by using nicotine patch or gum is at about 7%, but if they join a support group, it jumps to 43%. So this is what we're working toward with Immerse. Now let's get under the hood a little bit with Immerse. So to address the fragmentation issue, we started with a new form of the Bible. You can see a typical study Bible page over against a page from Immerse. So really what we did was return to a clean text. We gave the Bible an unmakeover. We removed chapters and verses, notes, center column references, red letters, all of the artificial things that have been added to the text. And as one high school student said to me recently who had just finished reading Messiah, he said, I never shared this with anybody, but with my study Bible, he said it made me tense. And for the first time, he said, I was able to read the Bible and actually just relax and read. We did add book introductions, more historical than theological, that help the readers get their historical bearings and then understand something about the literary genre of that particular work. And books that had been split apart, we put back together. So 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, originally one document, pulled back together. Luke and Acts brought back together. And then we did the hard work of identifying natural literary breaks. And these are identified by filigrees within the text. So for example, Matthew is not 28 chapters. Matthew is 5 major teachings of Jesus that begin with some variation of the phrase, and after Jesus had said these things. And Immerse represents Matthew in that way. We also took the books and put them in a better historical order. Again, the order isn't sacred and really wasn't solidified until the modern printing press forced a consistent order. And so instead of putting the synoptic gospels back to back to back, we built the New Testament around 4 gospel pillars. Starts with Luke and Acts. That was written by Luke. Luke was a protege of the Apostle Paul, and so then it's Paul's letters in a better historic order instead of the longest to shortest, which they currently are. Then you have the Gospel of Mark, who was a disciple of Peter, along with Peter's letters. The third section is the 3 letters written primarily to a Jewish audience, Matthew, Hebrews, and James. And then the Gospel of John with John's letters and capped off by the book of Revelation. And then again published it in 6 volumes. And the result of all of this is that reading Immerse is an invitation into the Bible story, making it harder to take out of context. But we didn't stop with the form, and the form certainly matters. We looked at the current practices around our Bible systems today and decided to pivot from a Bible study model to a book club model. Part of the recognition of this actually came from a pastor who we were interviewing who said, "I've come to identify most of the Bible studies that we do at our church as regurgitation studies. We're simply being asked to parrot back something that was in the text. And our new vision is for people to wade into the text with all of its nuance and mystery, with a new invitation to wrestle with the text. You know, that happened in the First Testament, the story of Jacob. He wrestles with an angel the night before he's going to meet Esau. Hip gets thrown out of joint. The next morning it's announced to him, your new name is Israel, one who wrestled with God and won. And I think that there are things about the eternal, frankly, that we are never going to get to unless we are invited into this kind of wrestling. As we thought about this new model of a book club, one of our early studies was around this experience with the 12-year-old Jesus in the temple. His parents come back after 3 days and find their son with the temple leaders engaged in intense dialogue, asking questions, debating the text. And we asked ourselves the question, could we recreate that? We're not creating it new. It's there. It existed in the first century. Could we recreate it in the 21st century? To guide our book club conversations, we created 4 open-ended questions. And those questions are captured in the Quick Start Guide that's in the front of every Bible. But the first question is, what stood out to you this week? The beauty of that question is there's no right or wrong answer to that. And people are willing to dive in to a conversation at that level. And then we asked the question, was there something that was troubling to you or confusing to you? And that's elicited a whole different level of conversations. Did anything make you think differently about God? And as we heard recently about one of the conversations, somebody in a group said, before Immerse and reading this way, I always thought of God as kind of being simple, and now I wonder if he is maybe more complex. And then the last question, how might this change the way that we live? And I want to tell you that this new approach and these new questions have opened up a whole new level of conversation that people are loving. And we're having people that are coming and saying, why weren't we invited to engage Scripture at this level before? One example of this, there are 300 prisoners right now at one of the state penitentiaries in Michigan that are doing Immerse. And in one of the groups, a man who apparently is a bit of a provocateur said, wasn't Luke supposed to be a physician? And so if that's the case, why in his description of the crucifixion are there not more details, the kind that a physician would talk about? And one of the other members of the group said, well, Wasn't this written back in the time of Rome? And didn't the Romans crucify people regularly? And didn't they crucify them publicly? Luke's audience probably had seen their share of crucifixions and really didn't need Luke to explain it for them. That's a different level of a conversation. We created Immerse then to be engaged by whole churches. This is the dream, that church leaders like yourselves would not treat this like a junior varsity sport. It wouldn't be turfed, to the spiritual formation department, but that this would be championed by senior leaders and whole churches would engage. If churches were to do 2 of these modules a year, spring, fall, in a 3-year period, you would have led your congregation through the entire Bible. It's a 5-day-a-week reading plan for 8 weeks. And if you listen to the audio version, it ends up being 29 minutes a day. So we say to pastors, when you're introducing your congregation, tell people this is a sitcom a day, 5 days a week. And in 8 weeks, you will have read the entire New Testament with your group. We did create an alternative 16-week reading plan. We had churches that came to us and said, Brooklyn Tabernacle, for example, 75% of our congregation, English isn't their native language, and so they need more time to read. But this is happening, and in time, what we're beginning to see, the churches are reading big, reading real, reading together, and it's getting into the bloodstream. Here are some of the additional resources that we have created for Immerse. There are weekly videos. Think of these as trailers to introduce people to what they're going to be reading that week. It helps to drop them back into the first century. We also created a custom Immerse audio Bible, male and female and racially diverse voices. This invites the participants into the ancient experience of listening, and in our modern era allows commuters to redeem their time. And then we created guides. If you're a pastor, we created a guide for you to know specifically how to launch Immerse, what kind of timetables to follow. We created a guide for our group hosts. Many people that lead small groups are used to being the teacher, the one who is the expert in the text. And that's still useful in some cases, but more than anything, we're looking for someone who will facilitate a larger conversation with more people. And then we created a family guide. We want this to be something that is embraced by entire families, including elementary school kids. And so we took each day's reading, we culled out of it something salient from the text that kids would be able to relate to, and then a series of questions that are age appropriate. And that's happening all over the country. And then the last thing is that we've now created and excited to announce a Spanish edition. It has everything that the English edition has except for the audio, which is currently being produced. And then finally, but very importantly, we decided to create Immerse in the New Living Translation. We wanted, without our fingers crossed behind our back, to say that we had chosen a text that was designed to be read. And if you know the background of the New Living Translation, it's written at a 6th grade reading level, same editorial target as USA Today, and people are loving their experience with the New Living Translation. Immerse is making major impacts across denominations. It's being used by Southern Baptists and United Methodists and Episcopalians, and across demographics. Millennials love it, but so do boomers. Our first denomination has embraced Immerse as their operating system for Bible engagement, and other denominations are in the queue for conversations. And it's happening in whole churches. I want to give you just one example, and then one example of something that happened in a group. Doxology Church, a church in the Dallas Metroplex, Chris Farland, their senior pastor, shared that every year their church does a church-wide initiative. And when they introduced Immerse, they had more than twice the number of any previous campaign that they'd ever had. But the icing on the cake was that people in neighborhoods began inviting their neighbors to come not to a Bible study, but to a book club. And the pastor showed me letters from neighbors thanking the church for what they had done and wondering when the church was going to do this again. This is somewhat leaked into university campuses, into the Christian school systems. It's leaked into prisons currently at Angola Prison, largest maximum security prison in the United States. 28 congregations in Angola are doing Immerse. So I want to wrap this up, and I want to frame it for you in this way. I'd like us, as we come to this conclusion, to think about Immerse as truly a paradigm shift in the way that we're engaging Scripture today, a paradigm shift in the Bible's form and form matters, and a shift in the practices around Immerse. And you know, as pastors, you are gatekeepers in this type of initiative. We have an amazing opportunity to take us from this place that we are, this silent crisis of disengagement, and to develop a new normal for the church, not only a new way of reading the Bible, but maybe even a new way of doing church. One of the stories from Scripture that continues to encourage us in our pursuit is the revival that took place, the Bible revival, in the post-exilic era, where the nation is coming back from this devastating 70-year captivity in Babylon to Jerusalem, which is in disrepair. But in the midst of the carnage and the chaos and no army and no treasury, it was actually the people that initiated the revival. They came to Ezra and Nehemiah. Thanks for rebuilding our temple, our walls. But we're still broken, and we sense that it's due to our disengagement from Scripture. Ezra and Nehemiah, being the great leaders that they were, built infrastructure for a revival, if you will. They assumed a posture that we're going to do this, and we're not going to fail. And you know, the Spirit showed up, evidenced by both tears and celebration, which is something that we have reported back to us all the time from groups now, that there are both tears and joy taking place in their groups. And so the question is, could this happen again? And could it happen in your church? We would invite you into that. If what we've shared today resonates with you and you want to know more about Immerse, go to immersebible.com to learn more, and there will be further information on the screen for next steps that you can take to begin Immerse at your church. We invite you to join hundreds of other churches, denominations, prisoners, young people in schools and universities on the Immerse journey. Thank you.